So Phyllis, Shaukat and you have known each other for the last, I think, 30 or 40 years. I met you around in somewhere in the 1980s, I think. But I want to start with you because you have this fascinating story, the kind of story that we all read. And I want to know about your parents, because the story you told me about your parents, how they met in Germany, and then suddenly they got separated, then they came to America, then they met again, something like that. So I want to hear the story from you. So tell me about it.
So first of all, Marina, I want to say what a joy it's been to be your friend for so many years, you and Shaukat, and to have met such wonderful people at your table and to share so many happy moments together in our lives. Coming to my story, okay, you can say that I'm actually a child of the United Nations, even though I was born nearly a decade after the UN was founded, because my own parents were saved by the UN, particularly my mother. Her life was actually saved by a lady who worked for the precursor of UNHCR, the UN Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, UNRWA, in post-war Germany. My mother was orphaned during the war at a very young age and had lived through some very bad times. And she had, at the age of 19, at the end of the war, no desire to go on living at all. She thought, what's the point? My parents are gone. My brother, who had been a violin prodigy, by the way, was gone. My aunts, my uncles, my grandmother, my grandfather, everybody was gone. My home is gone. My culture is gone. Why should I go on living? Let me join them in the afterworld. And this lady, who is from Czechoslovakia, she saw the potential in my mother and she put her through an UNRWA training course, and my mother became her office assistant working with the displaced people in the various camps in Bavaria. So it seems that my father, who also found himself in this displaced persons camp, saw my mother on the street. So she would have been 19, he would have been about 21. He went up to her, he grabbed her by the cheek and said, "You're a cutie, would you go out with me?" And then she looked at him and she said, "Mister, you have absolutely no manners. This is not a way to talk to me." And he just laughed. So to cut a long story short, here I am. They fell in love and they migrated separately to America.
I thought that you told me that they had lost each other in between.
No, what happened was that my mother had some relatives here, so they sponsored her and she was able to come over in 1947. My father had a longer wait to get a visa, so he came actually a year later. And then, of course, they met here and started to date and eventually got married.
And when they came here, what were they doing?
Well, sadly,
how did they start off in New York?
Well, sadly, they had no family to. My mother had cousins.
Did your father also lose family members?
Yes. So my father. It's a long story, but my father managed to escape from his town, and he survived the war in the Soviet Union at the time, deep in the Ural Mountains. Later on, he enlisted in the army and he fought with the Polish division of the Russian army and ended up liberating Berlin, among other places. So his story was a bit different, but he lost the people he left behind. His mother, his sisters were all killed during the war. So this woman, who was my godmother from Czechoslovakia, was with UNICEF after she left UNRWA, when UNRWA closed in 1947. And she was the person involved in creating the idea of the greeting cards for UNICEF. And she was unable to stay very long because the McCarthy period came up and she was asked to testify against other people, which she refused to do. So she left, she went to the West Coast and started working in the Girl Scouts movement, which is what she continued to do for the rest of her life. But she was an inspiration to me. Her whole life story was incredible. She was an exquisitely beautiful woman, born at the beginning of the 1900s, and she fell in love with an artist whose works are hanging in the Prague museums. And yes, and they ended up going to France in the interwar period, and she was part of the Cafe Society and knew Hemingway and all these people. And then during the war, she joined the French resistance. She got caught, but she managed to survive, and then, of course, joined the UN. So I really came from people who had the greatest hopes and inspirations and aspirations for a better world. And I felt that I was so privileged to be born at a time when there was no war, in a comfortable society, and that I wanted to give back. That was what motivated me to join the UN.
What an amazing story. It's like a film. We read about this, but to know you in person, that, when you hear these stories, but here you are, who've actually, gone through, with your parents have really lived through it. But that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So, Phyllis, now what I want to tell you about the UN, your background and how you've come to the UN is just amazing. So, these days, Shaukat and I are constantly dealing with people who are talking about irrelevance of the UN, and everybody says UN is useless, and all this that's the money that's going into it, we should close it down. A lot of people feel very strongly about it. So you tell me, what is your approach? Shaukat gave his view. I'd like to know your view on it.
So I think of the United Nations as a bridge. It's a bridge between the world as it is and the world as it should be. And times in our history, that bridge seems to be a little shorter, and at times that bridge seems to be impossibly long. And I think we may be now entering a new phase where that bridge feels impossibly long. That's number one. Number two, I think that there's a need for better education, because when people think about the UN, usually they're thinking about the political aspect of the UN, the Security Council, the General Assembly, how nations come to decisions or don't come to decisions, the use of the veto power and all of that. But as you know, Marina, I taught graduate school classes at Long Island University for 15 years. And
you got Shaukat there.
Yes, that's right. And the first class that I would teach about the UN, I would come in with a little story, a one-page story about a man who wakes up in the morning with his alarm clock and is checking the weather report, and is looking to see when his wife's flight is coming in from a conference about food security someplace, and on and on and on and on. And I say to them, what does this have to do with the UN? And then people would sort of say, there's one part where I mention the spread of flu. They said, oh, maybe it has something to do with that. And almost every aspect of our lives, when you think about it, the internet, the phone calls, airport codes that are standardized around the world, even the size of the envelopes that we use that are standardized. So many aspects, food security, health agreements, and so on and so forth, come through international agreements brokered by organizations of the UN system. So on that level, there isn't much dispute. I think people don't have the awareness. But when it comes to these political issues, there really is a problem. The world order keeps changing. Positions that countries took at one time are not the same because the people have changed. In fact, I remember...
what do you mean by people have changed?
Well, the human beings. So, for example, we were getting ready for the Millennium Summit. We were going to have a new millennium. It was very exciting. World leaders came together and adopted the Millennium Development Goals. But then in 2015, suddenly they had to negotiate a new set of goals called the Sustainable Development. Why? So I remember speaking to somebody in UNDP about it and saying, what is this whole process? We're talking about eradicating poverty or diminishing the levels of poverty, but whatever that particular goal had been, what is it all about? She said, well, the leaders who agreed at the millennium are not the same leaders now, 15 years later. They want to have their own say, their own impact. And so this is part of the problem. Also, unfortunately...
But why is the change, you think?
Well,
these are not very valid reasons.
Well, The change in what sense?
And the attitude from how the earlier delegates thought. And now you're saying that now the view...
Okay, well, let's start with the UN Charter. I think this is helpful. So the UN Charter was negotiated in 1945. And who were the people in the room who negotiated that charter? They were mainly men, because women were not in those positions so much in those days, in their 50s and 60s. Therefore, they would have been people who had lost their brothers in World War I and their sons in World War II. They knew that war was a nasty business. They had suffered. They didn't want any generations to follow them to suffer again. But those people are not with us anymore.
Right.
This is 40 years later. So new people come up. They are shaped by different historical events. Their concerns are different. I mean, we could probably all agree that now that we're at a certain age, the world we live in today is not the world we grew up knowing. So what has happened historically also is that, unfortunately, after the Napoleonic Wars, you had the Concert of Europe. After World War I, you had the League of Nations. And then, learning from the experience of League of Nations that you could never get full consensus, the UN came up with a veto concept in the Security Council. But now again, the order of the world is not exactly the same order of the world as it was 80 years ago.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the trends are not very encouraging, unfortunately.
And now talking about you started filming now.
Yes.
After you retired, and that's a new thing you started.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that. And what are you filming, and is there anything, tell us about it.
Well, it's an interesting story. So after I left the UN, I became executive director of a small family foundation, and it was using the arts. So I started to get exposed to various filmmakers, both feature filmmakers and also documentary filmmakers. And one trip took me to Munich. And there I thought, well, I'm going to go visit this displaced persons camp that existed where my parents met each other. And I went there expecting to see nothing much. So I was expecting to see absolutely nothing there. But instead, I saw a group of German regular townspeople mucking out this big structure, which then I found out had been the DP camp's bathhouse, where they would take showers and they would also do laundry. And the woman who spoke to me was the founder of this little NGO, and they were going to create Germany's first volunteer-led museum there. So one thing led to another, and I found out that the camp had only closed in 1957, so there was a 12-year period where people were living stateless there. Mm-hmm. And what were they doing, and how did they live, and what happened there? And the stories were just beyond belief. And I said, my goodness, no one has ever told this story. And of kind of a personal redemption of how people could take trauma and turn it into something productive. And I thought there might be something we can learn here. And so I've been working on this project as an independent person.
And it's been a while now, right?
Yes, it is. It's a very, very challenging task.
Yeah, and so when do you think it's going to complete it, and when is it going to be released?
I'm very much hoping to complete it this year. I still have to raise some funds for the finishing of funds, to
and
get
what's
licenses.
It called?
And so right now I'm calling it, the working title is After the Final No, which comes from the Wallace Stevens poem, which begins, after the final no, there comes a yes. And on that yes, the future world depends.
How amazing. Yeah. Before we finish, tell me about Bill, because he's such a wonderful person. When you meet him and his background, I've got some of his pictures on my, which I'm going to post, but introduce him a bit to everybody.
So I met Bill shortly after 9/11, and he was a television correspondent for ABC World News, and he had traveled all over the world. He had been Rome bureau chief. He went on all of the papal visits around the world with John Paul II. He authored the Encyclopedia Britannica article about him. But I met him in a different context. It turned out we had gone to the same university, but 10 years apart. And there was a lecture series given at a time that I had taken a little sabbatical from the UN. It was an official sabbatical from the UN, but I was working on looking at the role of the media after 9/11 as it related to Afghanistan and raising funds, which was sort of part of my portfolio at work. And Bill had just come back from Afghanistan, where he had spent several months, and he was giving a talk on this very, very subject. So that's how we met, and I have to say that he's a very unusual person in another regard. All the quarter century or so that I've been close to Bill, I've never heard him say an unkind word about anything or anybody.
Oh, nice.
And he's just a human being with the greatest heart imaginable.
He's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And so are you. I think you both complimented each other.
Thank you.
We always enjoyed being with the two of you, and I've got that picture of him with John Paul, which I'm going to post, and how many years are you together now?
About a quarter of century.
Quarter century,
Yeah.
yes. No, he's a wonderful, wonderful person.
Yeah.
But this is a lovely conversation, Phyllis, and you and Shaukat, so fond of you. And I'm so glad that we still spend time together, and it's really wonderful. A lot of history there, professional friendship. These are things really what so keeps the quality of our life.
Yes.
I have to say, one feels very privileged to have all people like you, Nala, so many others. One grows with each other, one learns from each other, and that's what the world is all about. The more you meet people from every aspect of life, you grow. That's the best education one could really have.
Well, I feel so privileged, and I love you and Shaukat so very much.
It's all mutual.
Your
And our
family.
children, I'm so glad that Asim and Greg in particular know each other. They went to the United Nations school, and from there, look, Greg has become so, is so successful in his law, in his career. I feel very proud when our children do well. That's lovely. So Phyllis, come, let's have some lunch and keep talking.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
That Greg likes Pakistani food.
As a matter of fact, he talked to his people at the law firm, hoping that you can cater for them sometimes with your new business.
Yes. But I remember because when he graduated, and you took us to an Indian restaurant.
Yes.
And you said that because he loves Indian food.
He does.
Yeah.
He does love this food.
Yeah, lovely. And every time he's come, I've enjoyed cooking for him. It is wonderful. So come enjoy yourself.
When I was starting my career at the UN, my godmother Helen said to me, "Phyllis, there's one lesson I want you to learn in life. Whether a person is above you or below you, treat everyone the same with equal dignity." And Marina, that's something I want to say about your husband, Shaukat. Shaukat was beloved by staff because he had the time for everybody, not just the quote-unquote important people, but even the most quote-unquote lowly clerical staff. It didn't matter what your rank was. You were a human being, and he really modeled the type of behavior that I wish everybody else would adopt in these situations, at work, in every other area of life, every other sphere of life. Everybody has dignity. Everybody must be treated accordingly.
Quite right. Yes, Shaukat actually really enjoyed working with all of you, and the fact that you people are together after that many decades, that is a testimony for this.
Yes, and I know that Nala and others shared this view.
Yes.
And we all feel very, very blessed.
Shaukat is actually very fortunate. Every time his chips were down, because that's what happens in the UN sometimes, you face. But every time he had any issues, I watched, and I was really very impressed to see that really people that he's worked with, they rallied around him to the extent they possibly can. Sometimes you're not successful because people who have problems, they are so powerful, they get their way temporarily. But I think that's what kept Shaukat going, because he had a lot of emotional support from all of you.
Yes, and at the end of the day, these are the people we cherish and the people that we carry with us.
And all the support that you give each other that makes you face all these problems, because these are problems that everybody is facing in the bureaucracy.